Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Survive This Crit. You are joining us for our 2025 Spooktacular, in which this year we have chosen Frankenstein's Monster. The OGs that read the book know that we are discussing Frankenstein and Frankenstein's Monster for our 2025 Spooktacular. Woo! Nick, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling really good, Kylie. Well, as for audience members who don't know, I am out in Australia right now, living it up, and just enjoying the little differences here and there between our culture and Australian culture. Some things are a little weird, some things are a lot of fun. But hey,
I feel
I'm
like you
just
gotta give an
enjoying my best
example.
life. Maybe one of the weirdest things I was telling you about this earlier, Kylie, but animals sound different, people. Okay. Let me say it again. Animals sound different, specifically crows. They sound completely odd. Actually, you know what? I'm going to broaden it. Birds sound weird here. Okay. The crows specifically, because they're the ones that I hear the most, they sound like sheep here, which is very odd.
Yeah, you've really
Thank you.
the Australia looks good on you. But as we jump in, so we're doing Frankenstein's Monster. And I think the most important part about this is the origin text. If you guys weren't tired
Yeah.
of me ranting about Bram Stoker's Dracula in the book, don't worry. I'm going to rant some more. Because we have the novel written by Mary Shelley that we actually both read this time because it's like under 200 pages, thankfully.
Oh my gosh, I think it was like 117, and I mean, like, I was just depressed with how long it took me to read 117 pages.
Me too.
I kept thinking like, I don't know, I didn't realize that you were kind of slow reading too, like me, but I was thinking the whole time,
I'm
like, man,
not, but
my wife would bust this out in like an hour or two.
I
She's
also,
so fast at reading.
there were times where I actually, reading it was like dozing off, I think,
Hmm.
because I was in Vegas last weekend, but also just like the language is very sophisticated for an 18-year-old. Like this was written
Oh
in the
yeah.
early 1800s, so like how we read is different than like the languages that we use is different than like how they spoke, like, and I have a little bit more in her background that leads to why she was so well read at such a young age. But I think, let's go into let's circle back time. Let's go to 1816. What was happening when the book was written?
Man, okay. So I did a little research on this. The origins of this novel are that we go back to 1800 specifically. That's when Mary Wollstonecraft, her maiden name Wollstonecraft, was born,
Mm-hmm.
and she unfortunately, well, not her. Sorry, let me rewind there a bit. What was it? We go back to the year 1800 when Mary Wollstonecraft was born. Um, Mary Wollstonecraft, who would eventually be Mary Shelley, but she suffers her first tragic incidents in life, which is her mother dies in childbirth, and she draws upon that. Mary Shelley, she wrote the story in 1818, and she drew upon several different inspirations, but one of the first I'll mention right now is some of the tragic loss that she suffered through the first like 18 years of her life. One of those being, again, her mother dying in childbirth, so she grew up with only her father,
Mm-hmm.
and also one of her children dying uh, shortly after their birth. So she kind of drew upon that tragic, uh, those emotions of suffering from loss when it came to describing depictions of death and loss in the story, which we kind of get the sense of. It kind of made me feel bad because a lot of the times when I was reading this book, Kylie, I was
Uh-huh.
like, oh my gosh, the original Victor Frankenstein, he's so dramatic and he needs to chill, okay? He needs to chill. And then I read Mary Shelley's Origin and like where she drew that from. And I was like, oh, no, I'm the asshole.
Now I'm the asshole. No, I wanted to add on to that though, because like you can feel the pain as she's writing this. Like, I don't think I felt it
Mhm,
more so from the monster's perspective too. Like, as he's observing these different things that humanity is going through. Like, he
mhm,
observes the family with the blind father for like a long time. It seems like, to the point where he learned French. Um, but you can see like the pain that she was going through with the every time that the monster confronted his creator too. You can see like that he
mhm,
has such earnestness and pain to be like to be received by his creator. And I think one thing I wanted to mention with her background, Mary Shelley's background, is her mother was a prolific writer in the 1800s and
oh
late
yes,
1700s. She's known as the mother of the first wave of feminism, which was really interesting. She wrote
yes.
her treatise, A Vindication of the Rights of Women.
Mhm. And additionally, her father was a big influence, honestly, for her,
Yeah.
because he, man, I can't recall his name right now. Unfortunately, I apologize, but
No worries. His name
he
is
had a lot of.
let's see. I have his last name. That's all I have. I have Wollstonecraft. So sorry.
No, it's all good. But basically, he had a lot of connections that would later become heavy influences for Mary Shelley, pertaining to this book, including, I believe it's Humphrey Davy. Um, Here, I'm just looking it up real
No,
quick,
you're good.
making sure I got the name right here. Yeah, Humphrey Davy, who gave public lectures on chemistry and electricity, which were some of the key elements that, uh, the key sciences that inspired Mary Shelley to,
That's
uh,
interesting.
you know, write a character that was born, from the spark of life, the basically using electricity to represent that spark of life.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, you know, her lover, then turned husband, Percy Shelley.
Oh, you made it sound so promiscuous right there. Her lover.
It was because they got together when he was still married. So he would come over and have philosophical debates with her father. That's how they met. And then he was so in love with her that they went and eloped. Again, when they first got together, he was still married. And I have a poem that he wrote if you want to hear it. At least the internet told me that this is a poem that he wrote.
Let's hear it.
Upon my heart, thy accents sweet of peace and pity fell like dew. On flowers half dead thy lips did meet, mine tremblingly thy dark eyes threw their soft persuasion on my brain, charming away its dream of pain. So apparently that's a poem he wrote for her.
Goodness, man.
He
Okay,
he had he
well,
was
that's,
crushing big time.
you know what? This all just tells me maybe the reason why I felt like everything was so dramatic was because that's very much the romantic, or is it the romantic or the Baroque period of history?
It's
You know?
romantic. So he was one of the most like I mean, Lord Byron's considered one of the most major English romantic poets, but Percy Shelley is considered to be up there in the ranks as well. Um,
Hmm.
but you know, a
Also,
fun
just how baller is it to be like, hey, I wrote this in a weekend, and it to this day,
right.
200 years later, is still very popular and very very influential on
Well,
pop
what's
culture.
interesting when they initially made this bet, Lord Byron and Percy wrote about vampires, but with this bet, Mary Shelley could not come up with anything initially. She like had no idea what to write about. She was panicking too because she's in this group of like literary intellectual romantics with Lord Byron, his lady at the time, his lover Claire Claremont, and Percy Shelley. They all had ideas about what they wanted to write, and she had nothing. And what it said the origin came from is it came to her in a waking dream. she at one point in time overheard Lord Byron theorizing about the reanimation of life. So she had this nightmare about a mad scientist raising this body to life, and it coincided with a reoccurring dream that she had about, let's see, yeah, about finding her baby girl alive over and over again after her baby had died.
Yeah, yeah, it's very sad to hear about that. Um, but as a quick aside, um,
As we step
I
aside
just
over
want
here.
to, as we step aside, to help kind of paint the picture of that weekend a little
Mm-hmm.
bit better for the audience who doesn't know. So this famous weekend we're talking about, it was a weekend where Mary Shelley, like you were saying, was hanging out with a bunch of literary elites, I guess you could say.
Yes.
But it was a weekend away with her friends
Mm-hmm.
at in Geneva, Switzerland, in the summer of 1816, which, funny enough, is famously known as the year without a summer. And
Ah.
we see it in a little example of that because even though it's summertime, you're supposed to be enjoying the outdoors, all of their friends were actually stuck indoors because of some uh, monstrous storms.
Mm-hmm.
So we've been talking about it. They, as a way to help pass the time, they decided to have a little literary competition, and it's just to see who could come up with the best horror story. And this weekend proved to be a big pivoting point for horror as a concept or
Yeah,
as
as a
a
genre, as
literary
especially
genre,
in the literary side, yeah.
because we don't just get Mary Shelley and her first first round of the Frankenstein story, but we also get uh, the story "The Vampire" uh, by John William Polidori, who was Lord Byron, the man who hosted the weekend away. Uh,
Mm.
John William was his physician. So he wrote the story of the vampire, which, for those who
I'm
don't know,
sorry, he's a
we
good
talked about it
physician
before.
and a author. That's crazy. Sorry, because all these people
Exactly.
are super young too.
I know. What were we doing?
What were
Honestly,
we doing at like 18?
Mary Shelley wrote this in a cave with a box of scraps.
Meanwhile, at
She
18,
wrote
I'm
this in
like singing
Geneva.
the Hamilton soundtrack over and over again.
Oh my gosh, this just goes to show you how different society is these days.
I
Um,
know.
all these people much younger or same age as us, way more accomplished than we ever were. But oh
It's
well,
okay. We won't.
we all get there
We
at a
can't get imposter syndrome yet. Come on. We gotta. We gotta push
we
through.
all get there at our own pace, Kylie. Okay, we all gotta just keep telling yourselves that. But yeah, so this physician John William wrote The Vampire, which was the story accredited for being the influence to Bram Stoker writing Dracula.
Really? I think you mentioned
Yes.
that in our Bram Stoker Dracula series. I don't know if it made the cut, but yeah,
No,
I
I
think
think I
you.
mentioned it. It might have been last year when we did the whole vampire Dracula
Yes.
spooktacular.
If you're more of a vampire person or a werewolf person, we've got spooktaculars for that too.
Mhm. Which Kylie, oh my gosh, I'm kicking myself in the butt for not doing this. But I was telling myself if I had time, I was going to do this. We've done werewolves, we've
Mhm,
done vampires, and now
mhm.
we're doing Frankenstein. And in my mind, I was like, what movie should I watch for this? And I was like, this would have been the perfect time to watch the movie Van Helsing. Have you seen that before?
No, I haven't.
It is a horror blockbuster starring, um, why am I blanking on his name right now? So Hugh Jackman. Hugh Jackman. I had a little brain fart moment right there. Maybe it's because I'm 30 or
Yeah.
almost 30.
Oh my gosh, you're almost 30. You're gonna be. By the time this comes out, you will be 30.
I
You'll be
know. I'm getting
ancient.
so old. I'm having brain fart moments. Um, but yeah, no, starring
It's
Hugh
onset
Jackman.
dementia.
No. Where am I? Who are you?
Welcome, I've brought you back to life. Now we've
Oh
come
my
full
goodness. So
circle.
yeah, what
Okay,
was it? Yeah, so
add
it's
to the
a
watch list.
story where Hugh Jackman plays Van Helsing,
Okay.
and it has werewolves, vampires, and Frankenstein. And this would have been the perfect time. I'm gonna make a point to watch it this year. around Halloween time or even earlier, because who
I
cares?
mean,
Just watch it.
it's spooky season now, basically.
By the
As
time
soon
this is
as your
out,
birthday is
so
over, well, as soon as your birthday is over, Labor Day weekend, it's spooky season. Just
hmm
saying.
yeah, all
That's
the
the
stores
rules.
already have the decorations.
Yeah.
So
Just follow the store schedule and you'll be set.
hmm
Um, any hoodles. Fully back to Frankenstein. I will add Van Helsing to my watch list because it will sum up like the last 3 years of spooktaculars we've done. We discussed how like it is she did discover this story as like a waking dream, and Lord Byron and everyone was like, wow, this story is incredible, wow, amazing. So because she was a woman, though, the first edition of this book was actually released without her name. And
mm, it makes
because
sense.
publishing as a woman at that time was basically impossible, so people assumed her husband wrote it, but the second edition did include her name.
A
Yeah,
woman
a
writing a
woman,
story. I
which
didn't even know that
I
was
didn't know.
possible.
Are we back in the 1800s? But you know what's interesting is like some critics were really shocked by it, but a lot of people loved it, and then all the citizens loved it. I think that there was something very unifying about the toying of creation, and it went along with some
Mhm.
very realistic themes that were happening in history at that time. But I did want to mention, we don't see Igor in the book at all or anything like that,
Mhm.
or Fritz as he's known in some of the earlier movies. So I did want to mention real quick before we talk maybe a little bit about the where Victor Frankenstein's inspirations came from was the first play adaptation of this came out in 1818. So like 2 years after. 'Cause in my notes I have that she wrote it in 1816. The first play adaptation came out called Presumption, Fate of Frankenstein. And
Mhm.
with how plays were presented at that time, it wasn't like a serious drama. There were a lot of creative liberties taken, including music, pantomime, exaggerated theatrics, and it included the introduction of Fritz, aka the assistant body digger, who in this rendition of the play was mute. Um, so, yeah, I thought that was interesting to add because, in the novel, it really is the back and forth relationship between Frankenstein and the monster over and over again, and their passing interactions that they have. And, Frankenstein losing his friends and family, but I don't cheer for the villain, so. Um,
Yeah. Out of curiosity, because I feel like this is going to be something we have to ask ourselves as we go through each iteration, each movie. But how would you rate Victor Frankenstein, or just Frankenstein the Doctor,
as a person,
as a person? Like, where do you place him?
where do I
Because
place him morally?
because in my mind, I don't like this version of Victor. I think I don't relate, or I guess I do kind of in a sense because that's part of makes the book like so enjoyable. The whole theme of man's pursuit of knowledge and not having any type of check on that pursuit.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
going back to Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park. Him asking the question or the statement. You spent so much time asking yourself whether or not you could. You never stop to ask whether or not you should. Which
ooh.
brilliant on Jeff Goldblum there, no. Or whoever wrote that
That's
line.
a really good quote because it does. I actually have, I think, a good Frankenstein quote as well from one of the movies. I think for the book, similar to you, I like the book because he is painted as the villain. I think a lot of the movies make the monster the villain, which the monster does bad things, but the monster is doing the bad things because he's trying to get the attention of his creator to grant his request. So, like, honestly, maybe my perspective of this has changed since I read it in high school previously, but I think I really appreciated that like it is the fallen Prometheus. Like he made the choice to dabble in creation and he suffers the consequences from it. And
Yeah.
So like as a person, I don't like Victor Frankenstein. It's weird that
No,
he's into his
I don't like him.
adopted sister.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I just remember that reminded me of how we were texting each other about the stories we were reading it, and she was sharing a little bit of my feelings, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's grooming in this story. They literally
Yeah.
adopted this. They adopted this girl, and then immediately from like, what is it? She's like age what 5 or something. It says in the story, and like you're gonna marry our son one day. Like what? Going back a little bit to what you said, I liked what you said about um, him was it Victor being the villain of the story. I like it because I
Yeah.
actually kind of disagree with it. I would see him as the hero of the story, but I see him as the tragic hero. You
Oh,
know,
interesting. Is it
he
because he
it's
loses
about
everything?
him. Yeah, it's about him, and he's the one who has to go through the lesson and learn the lesson. But unfortunately, learning the lesson requires suffering all those consequences. I would see the monster as the villain, but he's a sympathetic villain,
Mm,
specifically more so towards the end, but um, mainly because he's seen as this very sophisticated sentient being, and I think Mary Shelley does that on purpose a bit,
mm,
to kind of paint this image of like, okay, there's not just a clear black and white all the time. You get
yeah.
your good person, but your good person isn't perfect, and you get your villain, but your villain is someone who is relatable and understandable. It can, it's the difference between you and a villain is just the way you choose to see, or the way how you choose to follow your morality,
Well,
and to what extent.
I wanted to add on to that. So, how you choose to follow your morality. The monster, when he's reading Paradise Lost, when he has that time in the woods and he gets those 3 books, and he's just reading and learning about humanity, basically, he reads Paradise Lost, and in that read, he discovers that he compares himself both to Adam and Satan. So he sees himself as a certain level of evil in addition to seeing himself as human. So I think that leads on to the
Mhm.
point of what you were saying about the morality and like the sympathetic villain. Because while I don't necessarily think he was a villain, I think he had unfortunate circumstances thrust upon him of being reanimated and
True.
having to deal with that reality. He also was a being brought into creation who should be able to function in society in some way, shape, or form. There were a couple other literary inspirations that this book had that I wanted to bring up and see what your thoughts were on it. The modern Prometheus, I mean, that's based off of a
Oh
Greek myth.
yes. Which for people who maybe just have never heard of Prometheus before, quick explanation of it is Prometheus is this titan who steals fire from the gods and brings it to mankind, which also Prometheus creates. Prometheus creates mankind and brings them fire, and through the presentation of fire to people, it essentially represents this start of life and living in general for mankind. But then Zeus is angry with Prometheus and punishes him by sticking him up against this edge of a cliff where a hawk will come and pick at his liver every day. And at the end of every day, his liver will regenerate, essentially putting him through an endless torment.
Yeah, the Greek gods did not mess around.
A little detail I didn't know that I just learned about Prometheus through the study was because of this series of incidences, Zeus also decides to punish mankind as well. And so we
Mm.
get into Zeus creates Pandora, which is Pandora, the first woman. Prometheus only created men, and then Zeus created a woman to then act as the tempting force amongst all men. So he creates the first woman, and she releases all the evils into the world via her box.
You know what's ironic is that Adam and Eve, like Eve gets blamed for eating the apple. I'm sensing a
Okay.
theme. Women are the problem. That is interesting that with the bringing of woman with Pandora's
Mhm.
box, all of evil was brought. That is
Exactly. And then later
fascinating.
on, I didn't know this either. Prometheus gets released by Hercules or Heracles, depending on how you choose to pronounce him.
Mhm.
Heracles kills the eagle and frees Prometheus, thus ending his suffering. Although Prometheus also has to wear a ring as a perpetual reminder of his punishment and what he did.
That's
That was cool.
fair.
I didn't. Those were a couple little
That
details I
is
didn't know about the
cool.
story until
I
this.
really like Greek mythology, so you like obviously from these two inspirations alone, Mary Shelley was extremely well read for her time. I wanted to bring up two more and get your thoughts on those. So there's apparently a real castle called Frankenstein's Castle. It's a real location in Germany that has a interesting backstory where allegedly Johann Conrad Dipp was an alchemist who allegedly found an elixir of life and used it on various bodies. So
Mm.
that's kind of the inspiration for where the name Frankenstein allegedly came from, was the fact that there's a real location that was inspired by it. And then Plutarch's Lives was the other book that he was reading, one of the other books. And it's a series of 48 biographies of famous Greek and Roman figures that highlight their common moral virtues and failings. So this was written in like the second century AD, but it's basically a book about philosophy and morality, essentially, of like what was acceptable in the times.
Mary Shelley would have read this before she was like 16 years old.
Yeah, which just like
Oh my gosh. I
I
was, man, she just, people were so smarter back then.
I
We've
like that you
decreased,
said that
we've gone
grammatically
down.
incorrect too. People were so smarter back then.
People were much more intellectual and more sophisticated,
But they also
even just a
died
couple
at like
hundreds years ago.
I people also died super young though, because like Percy Shelley, for example, he died at 29 years old. And
Okay.
what's interesting though, he was married to Mary Shelley for 6 years, so they were married for a hot minute. He disappeared off the shore of Italy during a storm, and they found his body. But when he
Hmm.
died, they burned his body for cremation. His heart did not burn, so his heart is buried with Mary Shelley.
That is weird. I mean, I
People
guess
think
that's a little poetic and cute, but at the same time, no, no, I would,
it
no, I just
it
no.
I think it's because the heart like calcified by getting lost in the ocean and the storm, like all the salt and
Hmm.
stuff. But yeah, I thought it was cool.
Hmm.
If I burned, I'd want my heart to be there still. I wonder if Joshua would keep my heart. Probably not. That leads to, important theories and conversations happening in the early 1800s, including like vitalism. That was a big
Oh my gosh.
hubbub topic happening in the 1800s. For those of you who don't know what vitalism is, it's something I had to look up to. It's a philosophical and scientific theory stating that living organisms possess a non physical vital force or life principle that has itself outside of inanimate matter. So they can't be just reduced to chemical or physical processes. There's basically like there's a soul, and there's something that lives beyond the physical body. So that was something that was being discussed a lot in the early 1800s, as well as galvanism, which is the application of direct electrical currents in the body, which makes muscle contractions. So
Hmm.
this was done at the time with like dead frogs a lot because electricity was fairly new. In the 1780s, Luigi Galvani discovered that electricity could cause dead frogs' legs to twitch. And then Giovanni Aldini in 1803, who's the nephew of Luigi Galvani, he conducted experiments applying electrical currents to corpses of executed criminals, basically the real Dr. Frankenstein, which would make them convulse and appear to move.
Mm.
Spooky.
Yeah, I read up about galvanism prior to this, and it made sense. I was wondering what the inspiration was for why electricity played into this, and also I just felt a very strong sense of pride for my Italian heritage as I read that this was an Italian scientist, um, Luigi Galvini here, who would then
Luigi
go on to
Galvini.
inspire, who then would go on to inspire Mary Shelley. The last point I'll mention about the book And before we start talking about the movies, is Mary Shelley was also well traveled.
Oh.
Um, you know, like through if you read the story, you get
Mm.
a lot of different settings. You get a lot of talk about like Geneva specifically in Switzerland, but you also get Scotland, a very strong description of that, and France. And turns out that even through her young life, Mary Shelley was well traveled. She had been to all of those
Interesting.
places. Now, what was funny was when I did the research, I initially thought like, wait, she's been to all the places. She's been to Antarctica, and I was like, wait a
Yeah, has
second, no,
she?
that doesn't make
Like
sense.
towards the North
No,
Pole? I mean, in the book, they never actually make it to Antarctica. He's like, turn around, bitch. This is too much.
what a way to
And
say
his
that.
and his
Turn
crew is
around.
like, we're gonna have a mutiny. Turn around. So
That was the other cool thing about the story was it took the lesson of Victor Frankenstein and immediately applied it to another character who's the original frame of reference as the narrator of the story, Mr. Walton. Um, But yeah, no, by age 16, she had already traveled throughout most of Europe. Um, I was trying to not find a crude way to say that.
she's well
Um,
traveled. Means a
she's well
lot of
traveled.
things.
Yeah, so she's been to Scotland, she's been to France, she's been uh, in Switzerland. So yeah, just she based all of those settings in the book off of her own personal experiences and her own personal memories, which is very
That's
cool.
really sweet. Because, I mean, the
So,
settings are super vivid. Like, that is one thing that I really
oh yeah,
like about it is like you do feel like you're there with what you're learning and discovering. But now for those who are less literary and want to focus on the movies, if we're going to transition to the movies, give me like a comparison contrast. Like, what did you like about the book versus the movies? Because don't worry, guys, Nick and I watched a lot of movies that were either Frankenstein inspired or adjacent to Frankenstein, so we have a lot of thoughts. But what are some of the differences that we see as a trend across the board when it comes to the portrayal of Dr. Frankenstein or of Frankenstein's monster?
well, one of the main things is there's several main things, and that would include the look of the monster for one.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, you know, you see or you don't see, but you read the description of the monster from the original novel, and it's very much like this grotesque and stitched together um, creature. I believe like the most clear description I read was he had yellow skin and black lips, which is different than
I
what we
wrote that
normally
down
see.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't get that a lot in the movies. You know, it's a little hard to tell in black and white for the originals, but very much
Well,
Frankenstein has like he's portrayed in pop culture as like kind of green or pale skin. He's
for
got the bolts in his neck.
yeah, the bolts. So I want to mention the reason that he was green. So that is a pop culture thing, but he was painted green during the original movies because when they're filming in black and white, there's a limitation of like what kind of colors that they could use to really show a more sickly color that isn't just skin color. They made him like a green gray to make him appear more ghastly on screen. And
Mhm.
apparently, in the 1931 film, the makeup took 3 hours to put on and off every single day.
That actually doesn't sound too. I mean, that sounds like a lot,
It
but
sounds like a lot, but
when you compare it to other movies and stories we've heard of people doing makeup, like I've heard tales of actors having to be in makeup or having to go through the makeup process for like 8 hours. You know,
geez, I don't. Yeah, that's insane. So yeah, 3 hours,
that's
I
a
guess,
full
in the
workday,
grand scheme.
Kylie.
But if you think about it too, they were filming on film, not digital at the time. So even getting any footage was like a much more strenuous process. But I think you're right. The physical appearance of Frankenstein's monster was very different than in the books. And then in the books, singular, because there was not a sequel as far as we know. I think a big difference too is like he's very eloquent in the book. He's a
Oh
very,
yeah,
very fast learner. And I think one of the films I watched kind of portrays the quickness of the learning. but most films really portray him as like a very slow learner. And maybe it's because in the book he spent like 6 months in the woods watching a family, um, watching them through the seasons, as the book says, to the point where he learns French
Stalking
and
them.
he stalking them and like leaving them little rewards, like leaving them wood, giving them like helping them with their chores without them noticing. So I think, with that being said, I think generally speaking, it does irritate me that most of the movies, even the original Universal Pictures 3 movie franchise, he's really not portrayed as gaining any type of intelligence along the way. He just seems to be
Hmm.
gaining confusion and violence, which I don't love. But that is a really big difference between the book and the movies.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a very difficult thing to really pin down because you have two different sides of an argument here. You have one, which is that he's new life, and so he has to go through the whole learning process. Kind of like how a baby goes through life and having to learn to walk and talk and whatnot. But then again, they also use a fully developed adult brain. So
Mm-hmm.
if you want to go off of if you're someone who's maybe a neuroscientist, I'm no neuroscientist, but you could argue like if it's a fully developed brain, there's no time wasted on neurons, neuron paths having to be connected and whatnot. So it should take them maybe a faster period of time to get back up to walking and talking. One of the things that like always, um, I guess not confused, but I kind of pondered about the movie and the books is this idea of he used a previous person's brain. So why wouldn't it be the case that that person's mind would be in the body of the monster?
You know what's
And
funny is the
mhm,
1990 classic Frankenhooker touches on that, because
I
you
imagine.
would think you would think that the bot like the brain of somebody else being put into the body would indicate that there's like memories or emotions or something there. And that is something that really wild movie that I'll talk more about touches on.
Another difference that's very clear is that in the novel, Victor works alone. Throughout every
Yeah.
movie, Dr. Frankenstein has some sort of companion, whether that's Fritz in the 1930s, 1931 movie, or as he's more famously known now, Igor.
Yeah, which is essentially like the same type of character, and that's the character that came about during the 1880 play that was made inspired by the book essentially. Logically, he would need someone to help him dig up these bodies and stuff. And there were times in the novel he had friends help him nurse him back to health after the many breakdowns that he had after realizing what he'd done was amoral. Like Henry, he had Henry nurse him back to health at least once, and then his father come save him as well. So he had people in his life, but he didn't have like a scientific assistant, which I think was a definite plus for the movies, especially when it's like a horror but also trying to be comedy at the same time, which actually at Horror Unleashed in Las Vegas, which just opened, if anyone's interested in going to a year-round haunted house scene, you should totally do it. One of the themes is Universal Monsters. So we did get to see Dr. Frankenstein and the monster like arise and him be like, "It's alive!" And that was
Yes.
really cool. And like the monster was like talking to him and grabbing him and shaking him, and I was like, this is so cool. I'm reading the book. Thank you everyone so much for joining us on this spooktacular episode where we were covering Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. Make sure to come back next week for more Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster backstory, content, movie reviews. Make sure to come back. You won't want to miss it. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.